her, and there was alligator chasing us with the ball. Yeah. Yeah.
I need money.
You all want to have a chipper?
Yes, the garage is almost here, so.
Almost.
Yeah.
Give it to it.
Yeah, I know. You're crazy.
Yeah. And then we'll watch that. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Krishna Nam Kirtan Ki Jai, Gaud Premanandi, Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandjana Salakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajunulambita Bhujo Kanakavadato Sankirtanaika Pitoro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Paro Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavakaro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Saurito Uday Pushpavanto Chitra Sambotamno Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Pavaya Charansaho Sugaro Paramano Sundaro Subalapriyo Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Tapta Kanchan Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Harikriye Shri Guru Vaishnava Guru Parampara Ki Jai Dadi Gopal Ki Jai Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita Oh, Dr. Vrinda Oh, So our last discussion, we followed Ram and Krishna through Mathura and liberation of Kamsa, if you will, and then the trauma of separation that occurs after the earlier Brahman, when Akrura is bringing Krishna out of Vrindavan. That is dramatic, but not everybody is left behind. So those who follow him, Nandamaras and Gopas, elder men and coward boys, they will be asked by Krishna to return due to extenuating circumstances that require, as reason would have it, that he remain, that they return along with Nanda Maharaj without him. So from there, of course, shortly thereafter, Krishna will send Uddhava. He will meet Uddhava, send him back to Vrindavan to give messages to the devotees. And later he will send Balaram and so forth. Later he will come himself and take them all to Goloka Vrindavan down. But this is the separation that, as I say, characterizes the Prakat Lila, because he stays in Vrindavan for a relatively short period of time compared to the amount of time spent in Mathura and Dwarka in separation. And so today we turn to Madhya Lila of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is analogous in many respects to Krishna's leaving Vrindavan. And while it is equally painful to the inhabitants of Navadvip, all his close family, related, extended family, and so forth, associates, at the same time, for sadhakas, the Madhya Lila is that Lila in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches, by example, instructs Rup Sanatana and so on and so forth, and teaches, that is to say, how we can enter into Navadvip which is not different from Vrindavan. We heard this morning that the discussion of the afternoon Leela, Aparana Leela, where Krishna returns from herding. With regard to the Nitya Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is on the other side of the Ganga and in his Madhya Leela and comes out from a secret area, if you will, and into the city of Mathura, or excuse me, of Navadvip, where he's performing some kirtan, enters every house and every heart, every devotee there. And we heard from Vrindavan Das Thakur had referred to it as Mathura. So, we don't know of any other notion of Mathura in Gaur Leela, but Mathura as conceived, being identified with Navadvip on the part of Vrindavan Das Thakur, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is going there regularly in his Aprakat Leela on a daily basis, is certainly not as dramatic as we find in the Prakat Leela when he leaves. It's analogous to his leaving Vrindavan, but where does he go? Well, as we'll see going forward, he ends up going to Jagannath Puri, which is, as I often say, a particular moment in the Dwarka Leela. And of course, he stays in Dwarka longer than in Mathura. And that's quite a distance away. Mathura is relatively close. It's in the Braj Mandal, after all. There the king comes and is presiding over the villages and forest area, cowherd areas, and so forth. So Madhya Leela, and this doesn't mean he's going to go to Navadvip, but he's going to leave Vrindavan and Madhya Leela, and it's characterized by his taking sannyas. Sometimes I don't know, I have to think back, either the barber or Kesha Bharati, the sannyas guru of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, compared to Aquila, taking Gaur Krishna out of Navadvip. But these leelas are same, but a little different. Here, the difference, of course, is that Krishna is in the form of a devotee and teaching by his example. We refer to it as his Acharya Leela, where he takes the role of an Acharya. He says in Bhagavad Gita, everyone should surrender unto me. Exactly how to do it, he comes in Gaur Leela to show in no uncertain terms, by his example, by his teaching, and the teaching that he implored the founding acharyas to write about, and also established by their own example. So the Madhya Leela is important to us. It's the main focus of Krishnadas Kaviraj and Chaitanya Charitamrita. He begins his Madhya Leela narrative, relevant to the point that this is his main concern, the Madhya Leela. He begins his Madhya Leela narrative with deference to Vrindavan Das Thakur. And one of the reasons, of course, is that up until that time, despite there being other texts framing, telling the Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like Chaitanya Mangal of Lochan Das Thakur, Kavi Karnapur has a work also. The work of Vrindavan Das was much comparatively more celebrated. And we see that in the deference that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami pays to him, by way of saying, he's said everything, he's told it all. I'm going to add a little something. Well, he adds quite a bit actually, but this is his mood, right? And his emphasis, as I'm saying, is the Madhya Leela, and he tells us that indirectly at the onset here of the Madhya Leela, with his deference to Vrindavan Das Thakur, who he says has written extensively about the pastimes of the Navadvip. So I'm going to write a little something more about his, what he first calls his Seish Leela, which has two divisions, Madhya and Antya. The first, so the deference to Vrindavan Das is, in one sense, is twofold. In one sense, he's a senior. He wrote before. His book is widely celebrated and relished by all the devotees. And so I'm not here to outdo him with another book, but I have had the association of Raghunath Das and Surat Damodar in Jagannath Puri, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spent a long time. And those Leelas are not described in detail in Vrindavan Das's book, where the pastimes of Navadvip are the main focus. So he refers to him because he's his predecessor, but also, we can say, internally, because after all, the Navadvip pastimes, the Navadvip Leela, is where we want to enter. So Vrindavan Das is focused on that target. Of course, it's the Prakat Leela, as it's manifest in this world, but he himself reveals his heart more than once when he says things like, oh, see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu seated on the bank of the Ganga with his students. What could I possibly compare this wonderful sight to? I could compare it to Brihaspati, the guru of the gods, but he is biased towards the gods, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has no bias. He gives love of God even to Jagai and Madai, and everywhere. I could compare him to the moon, but the moon has spots, and he is spotless, and so on and so forth. But he says, if I was to compare to anything, there's one thing that comes to mind. That is Krishna seated on the bank of the Ganga, taking lunch with his friends. Oh, and my heart is, when can I enter into that Leela? He came just after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu departed. So he never had the darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's said to be the last disciple of Nityananda Prabhu. His book, he says that in my heart, the Antaryami Nityananda appeared and told me to write this book. So the focus there is on Navadvip, and in a sense, Vrindavan Das is referring to him for this reason also. I'm talking about the way. Don't get distracted. Think the way is the goal. The goal is not to enter into Jagannath Puri and see him as a sannyasi. As a sannyasi, there is some distance created between himself and his associates, because you have to give the sannyasi another seat, and it tends to be alone, and so on and so forth. So he's out of the social framework, right? As Nimai Pandit, Vishwambar, he's fully in the social network, if you will. But as a sannyasi, then he's, so Prabhupada sometimes referred to it as social suicide, right? Ending the social life of society, friendship, and love as it goes. So this creates a distance, and also, of course, going forward in Chaitanya Charitamrita, particularly towards the Anti Leela, he becomes distant from the devotees by his ecstasy. He becomes internal, and he can't communicate with them, relate with them, as he did so intimately in the past in Navadvip. So Navadvip, the Aishwarya is missing. Right? It's there underground, but it's subsumed by the prem. And so there he is. He's a householder like us. And every day we'll go to Kirtan with him in the courtyard of Srivas Thakur, and so on and so forth. And we're hearing about those leelas in the morning in our discussion. So the sannyas creates some distance, but Tyaktva Sudus Tyajaripstaraj Lakshmi. Bhagavatam says, Dharmishtarya Vachasa Yalagaram Mayamridam Taitayip Sitamanvidam. Vande Mahapurushate Charanadavan, and it characterizes the whole problem. Chektavasudu Jajasureps. What could be a bigger problem? I said he's separated from the devotees in terms of the social life, and who will suffer the most? Vishnu Priya Devi. Chektavasudu Jajasureps. The Raj Lakshmi, Vishnu Priya. Because you will find, as we hear going forward, that it was determined by Sachi that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu should reside in Puri. And one of the reasons being that there's commerce between Puri and Navadvip. She compared the two rooms in the same house. And so the devotees would be able to go, at least during Rath Yatra, spent during the rainy season, Rath Yatra, Chatumasya, spend with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. News about him would come and so forth. If he went all the way to Vrindavan on the other side of India, then it would be difficult. This is not part of the commerce, too distant. But this doesn't apply, right, to his, in effect, widow of his social suicide, Vishnu Priya. She cannot go. He gave up the Raj Lakshmi, Bhagavatam says. On the basis of a curse of a Brahmin, who cursed him never to have a happy family life because he wouldn't let him into the kirtan. Despite the fact that, in his own estimation, that Brahmin thought, I'm very poor, pure, I only drink milk. That's I sustain myself only in drinking milk. And Mahaprabhu said, you think that by that type of purity you can enter my kirtan? No. We have chocolate milk in my kirtan, if you like. This is not about giving up, but I live in an ocean of milk. It's Goloka. It's surrounded by a moat of milk. You have to cross over that effect. You have to have that affection to swim the ocean of milk and arrive there in my Sweta Dweep, private island, right? Not just by renunciation. Tyag is not the way. Renunciation is a result of bhakti. It's not the way within bhakti. But he honored the curse nonetheless, right? And so Bhagavatam says, Mayamrigam Deite Psidamandanabha. And on the basis of that, he chased after people like us, bewildered by Maya. One day, I have all my obeisances to him, disciplined person, Bhagavatam says. So we are the recipients of his Madhya Lila, the blessing, that nonetheless causes some pain to the inhabitants of Navadvip. I suppose you could say there's somewhat of a parallel in Gaur Lila in that Krishna speaks the Bhagavad Gita, Uddhava Gita, also in his later Leelas. But then again, as I say, he speaks about bhakti, but he doesn't show it himself. When he takes himself the role of a devotee and shows it, what could be a better teaching, right? So this he has done as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the focus of Chaitanya Charitamrita is on the Madhya Lila. The Madhya Lila is the way. And the way, if practiced properly, results in if you publicly conduct yourself as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has shown, you will be drawn within. And your public life will come to an end. And internally, then the doors to Vrindavan, Navadvip open that we find in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Adi Leela. Krishnadas Kaviraj tells us again that it's two divisions, Adi Leela and Sesh Leela. And then he further divides the Sesh means end, remainder, Leela, into Madhya and Antya. And he tells us that For 24 years, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu resided in Navadvip. And for 24 years, his Sesh Leela consisted from the point that he took sannyas and left Navadvip. So, and he remained amongst us in the Prakat Leela for 48 years. So there's two basic divisions, 24 years in Navadvip, 24 out. And the further division then, it becomes Madhya and Antya, divides the 24 years outside of Vrindavan into 12 and 12. The 12 years Madhya Leela, 12 years Antya Leela. And among the 12 years of the Madhya Leela, there's a further division. 6 years traveling, 6 years residing in Jagannath Puri. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to Jagannath Puri, he stayed a short time, converted the whole city, the king, Raj Prataprudra, so on and so forth, Sarvabhauma, the guru of the king. And then Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Rakshama, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahimam, Ram Raghava, Ram Raghava, Ram Raghava, Rakshama, Ram Raghava, Ram Raghava, Ram Raghava, Pahimam, Krishna, Krishna. He began to go to South India, and then Ram Bhaktas there. And we went to give them Krishna Bhakti for the most part. Not everybody. Some Ram Bhaktas, their prospect, their destiny had already risen. So we confirmed it, blessed it, celebrated it. But this is more emphasis on the two sides of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the breadth of his Leela, rather than the depth of his Leela. You could say is emphasized, but nonetheless, we find some very deep moments in his South Indian Leela. Now, he traveled, as Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says, for 6 years, but only 2 of them in South India. So that's a long distance. And there's Krishnadas Kaviraj has mercifully chronicled this traveling of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He went here, he went there, he went here, he went there. Later, the great Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur sent his disciples to establish the footprint deity of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wherever he is said to have gone in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Prabhupada Sridhar Maharaj was also part of that campaign. That's a way to spend your time. In old age, in the United States, a retired couple gets a motorhome and travels around to the different parks and places and continues on with Rami Kata and texts and emails back to how are their grandchildren doing. But here is a better idea. Travel to all the places where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu lives. And you want to stay there. Hear the story, leave the stories there, read them, discuss them, move to the next. Good way to spend your retired years, right? So the breadth, outreach, some preaching on his part, but the depth is also there in the context of his preaching. What could be deeper, for example, than Ramananda Samvad? At the bank of the Godavari, he met Ramananda Roy, who was an internal associate of his, and really sent him to Puri, where he ended up residing with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And there, the Bhagavad Gita is spoken again. In Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna asking the question, Arjuna asking the questions, Krishna giving the answers. Mahaprabhu considered Ramananda Roy to be Pandava Arjuna, and his 4 brothers to be the Pandavas, his father to be Maharaj Pandu. And And so at Godavari, what do we find? We find basically the essential teachings of the Gita. But now Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as devotee is asking the questions, and Ramananda Roy on the Varjan is giving the answers. And it's condensed edition, as Chaitanya Charitamrita is a condensed edition of the Bhagavatam, right? And the Gita, and really the entire canon of the Gaudiyas, including the Goswami's text and so on and so forth. I should mention that as Krishnadas Kaviraj begins the Madhya Lila, giving deference to Vrindavan Das Thakur, describing a little bit how the Lila is divided, as I said, into Madhya, Antya, so on and so forth, making his focus on the Madhya Lila. He then proceeds to introduce Rupa Sanatan, and that's it by way of mentioning them and the number of the books that they've written, going on to say, but there are too many to cite them all here. And the implication may be, and some of them are in the Grantha Samadhi. In Vrindavan, there's a Grantha Samadhi. Grantha means scriptures here. And it said some of the scriptures were too high, they put them in Samadhi, covered them up. Some of them that are mentioned by Vrindavan Das, by Krishnadas Kaviraj, of Rupa Goswamis, I could never find them anywhere. They must be in the Grantha Samadhi. But Vrindavan Das could relish them. The writer, Krishnadas could relish them. The author of Govinda Lilamrita, where he took 11 verses of Rupa Goswami and turned it into thousands of verses, a typical Sunday, right? In the Aprakat Leela of Krishna and Braj, thousands and thousands of verses. And his beautiful, extensive, and very esoteric commentary on Krishna Karnamrita, the book we said the other day that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu brought back from South India, considered to be the bhava, Radha Bhav is found there, that he's all about, along with the fifth chapter of Brahma Samhita, which is the Tattva. These two books, he said, everything is there. So Krishnadas Kaviraj wrote a beautiful commentary on Lila Sukha or Bibalanga Thakur. It's goes by both names, Krishna Karnamrita. Very esoteric himself, and obviously he relished the Goswami. As I'm saying, at Godavari, the conversation between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Roy is not only a condensed version of the Gita, but the whole text of Chaitanya Charitamrita is a condensed version of the Bhagavatam and all the sacred texts, really. Puranas, Vedanta Sutra, and what we call the Bhakti Shastras of Rupa Sanatan that he's mentioned earlier. He introduced them at the beginning in the first chapter of Madhya Lila. He introduces them because much of this Madhya Lila is going to be about them. Rupa Siksha, Sanatan Siksha. As far as like direct Siksha, he basically gives a synopsis of the whole, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Bhagavatamrita, so on and so forth. Principal persons in the Madhya Lila, Mahaprabhu chose them. What is it said there? Nana Shastri Charanaika Nipano Sadharma Samstapako Lokanam Hita Karano Tribhuvane Manyo Sharam Karo. One day Rupa Sanatan, they collected all the revealed scriptures and drew from them to just to follow what Narada told Vyas. You've written so many books, but you need to write something that emphasizes in no uncertain terms the efficacy of bhakti. so much about karma and jnana. Granted, that's what most people are interested in. Either take something or give it up because it didn't turn out to be what I thought it was. Renunciation, a disappointment, an anger coming from frustrated lust for things. Karma and jnana. So many angry jnanis, right? But bhakti, that can make something out of jnana, make something out of karma, out of contemplation, meditation, and out of movement. You can take, as I would say, karma movement cancels jnana, and jnana cancels karma, and bhakti makes sense out of both of them. Otherwise, under themselves, from the devotional perspective, neither one makes sense. It cannot be the whole picture. It's said that there are any number of tributaries coming down from the Himalayas, but they are only really successful in entering the Bay of Bengal if they enter into the Ganga, or they enter into the Jamuna. So karma and jnana, something like that. If they enter into the main flow of the texts, that is bhakti, then they have efficacy. Varnashram without any karma, without any worship of Vishnu, won't be effective. And jnana, in terms of its goal of liberation, will not be effective without bhakti. Naishkarmam apyatuta bhava bhaditam. Sobhate jnanam alam niranjanam. Narad tells Vyas. But to speak of karma, even knowledge without bhakti is not very beautiful. Nishkam karma, jnana. So this is another world, another creation, right? What is the verse? Tadvisargo janatag. These are all, this is the Narad Bhagavatam, these verses. And he spoke to Vyas to convince him to just like take that Bhagavad Purana you wrote and turn it into the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then go back into the Matsya Purana, the Kuma Purana, and make a verse glorifying the Srimad Bhagavatam, those verses that Rupa Goswami drew upon. Vyas was the editor, right? All the texts. So all this is condensed in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And my point is, all those extended books of the Goswamis, which are just following the same instruction of Narad given to Vyas, in no uncertain terms, emphasize the efficacy, the virtue, the glory of bhakti in terms of its generosity and in terms of its post-liberated status, its nirgun nature that distinguishes it from all the other paths. Karma being under the Rajagun, Gyan, Yoga being under the Sattva. How can they have efficacy or currency to afford us real estate and transcendence? Only if bhakti touches them, then they can. If you think like that, which you should, then you think, well, why not do only bhakti, right? This is the idea. So Vyas wrote Srimad Bhagavatam, but still the Goswamis came in and they took Srimad Bhagavatam and they've taken that same emphasis. This is Guru Parampara, the same emphasis of Narada Muni to Vyas. They're in the same Guru Parampara and doing the same thing. Another way to look also, Krishna gave the 4 verses in Bhagavatam to Brahma. This is the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, 4 verses of Bhagavatam. And here we have 18,000 verses. This is a commentary on the 4, right? Later in Madhya Lila, at the beginning of Rupa Siksha, the instructions to Rupa Goswami by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as told to us by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he begins that chapter with a beautiful verse, and I can't recall now. It's a Sanskrit verse. He begins it by saying, just as Krishna gave the four enlightened Tene Brahmahridadikali. Krishna enlightened Brahma with the four slokas. Krishna enlightened Brahma in the Brahma Vimohana Leela. First verse of Bhagavatam says, revealed all the truths. These are successive installments. He gave them the four verses that are essential verses of the Bhagavatam and approved of his ideal of Sakirasa. Later, he brings him to Vrindavan to show him what it's all about. To show himself there, not in the Gyan Mudra, giving a blessing, giving Upanishadic Vedic teachings, but eating with a picnic with his friends, unrecognizable, similar, but didn't look very guru-like in that situation. So he questioned him. And Krishna is showing him now, I'm the object of that friendship that you want in the purest, fullest form of it. And while I am the object of that love, here I am, see me, surrounded by those who are the ashraya lambana, the shelter of that love, the personification of that love. The two, the object of love and the love must be there, and the two are one. How can you have love without an object of love? How can you have love without the love itself, the vessel of love? So he's showing them all. These are successive, but Kaviraj Goswami says, just as Krishna enlightened Brahma at the dawn of creation, similarly he revealed all the Vedic truths to Rupa Goswami. We refer often to our sampradaya as the Rupanuga sampradaya, followers of Rupa Goswami. Now that phrase, of course, that term, that word comes from Raghunath Das Goswami in his Manasiksha, the final verse. And admittedly, he's referring to it as in terms of following the bhava of Rupa Goswami as he himself is. Rup Raghunath, right? These two. But there's two sides, of course, to Rupa Goswami. His internal bhava and his external side through which he's teaching about bhakti. And all four of the bhavas of Braj, the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is coming to awaken in the hearts of his devotees. And primarily, of course, Sakya Bhav and Nityananda Prabhu's participation and Gopi Bhav, right? So, as I've said before, those following Nityananda Prabhu, Sakya Rasa, they're not without a debt to Rupa, right? What he is told about Sakya Rasa, no one is told these things. So many details. In the beautiful edition of the Narmasakas and so forth, in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So, all of the points, all in Ramananda Samvad, all of the works, you'll find the works of the Goswamis are being cited, right? The Bhagavatam verses, verse from this Purana, that. So this is the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita. So, but here we're saying, in the terms of his outreach, it's not absent from the depth. We should not separate the breadth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's reach from the depth. Indeed, the breadth, the outreach, he shows as the means to enter into the depth. So for 6 years, he traveled and preached widely. And he wasn't always preaching about Gopi Bhav directly, right? Before he lifted off on his traveling, if you will, he converted Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. He didn't teach him about Manjari Bhav. He taught him the Atmarama verse, right? And so many different meanings, and showed his opulence of knowledge, and retired the interest of Gyan and Karma in Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who tested later on in that regard. And the Bhattacharya, of course, passed the test. So some general preaching, Ram Raghava, Ram Raghava, Ram Raghava, Rakshana. What kind of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is this? Prophets putting Sita Ram in Bombay? It's the kind that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. That's the kind of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Where she also preached to Ram Bhaktas. And if he found Ram Bhaktas, who had Ram Bhakti, he honored them, right? Hmm? He honored their bhava and helped it to flourish, right? So Prabhupada did things like this. As an example there of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In Bombay, many Ram Bhaktas. We put Sita Ram on one of the altars. We put Radha and Krishna in the center. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda, we had 3 altars, right? So, and who could be a better example of the breadth, of the reach of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Nityananda Prabhu? And in him, in Prabhupada, we find his avesh, his presence. And that kind of outreach, well, we see 6 years he traveled. I'm saying that this is the breadth, but it's not separate from the depth. When the breadth, he went south for 2 years. He went to Jagannath. He went to Navadvip, started to go to Vrindavan. Sanatana Goswami said, "Don't go like that. Not a good idea to go with thousands of people are following you. There's Muslims are along the way. They could cause trouble from a political point of view. It's very astute, and also from a bhajan point of view. We should go into Vrindavan just as a humble devotee. Therefore, we should think." When Jiva Goswami says repeatedly at the beginning of every one of his 6 sandarbhas, his 6 treaties, and I offer my respect to Rupa and Sanatan, who are famous as devotees in Vrindavan, famous as devotees in the Mangala of Braj. Oh my goodness. What kind of devotees are they? To be famous as devotees, yeah. And Kabirashis, they are the elders, right? Amongst our founding acharyas and Shiksha Gurus, they gave the Bhakti Shastras. This is all emphasis, their teachings in the Madhya Lila. And they worked, they established temples. They had, look at the Radha Govinda temple. It's an architectural wonder in which there is a blend of Hindu and Muslim architecture. We wanted to make some harmony. Moguls were invading some, and so the harmony was done. And see the influence of Chaitanya, of Rupa Goswami, and Sanatana Goswami, Jiva Goswami. These 6 Goswamis, commissioned as they were by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Tomorrow we hear Gopal Bhatta Goswami's appearance day, his extraordinary contribution. What was the effect? That at that time, we find Muslim artists starting to depict Krishna Lila. And also write poetry. There's a whole group of devotee Muslims. They stayed Muslim in many respects, but they became devotees of Chaitanya, writing about him in their poetry, songs of feeling for him, separation for him, and you can find the teachings of the Goswamis there. So they were converting, they were converging, they had these ideas to bring the gift of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the whole world, right? So you see how our party bar is just an extension of this. People say, "Well, what is he doing? Opening so many temples, flying around in a big airplane. Could sit on the Radha Kund. It's right there in Upadesh Amrita. Sit at Radha Kund and do bhajan." Right? That is what it's all about. Get yourself a plane ticket, get there, sit on the banks of Radha Kund and do bhajan. It's right there in Upadesh Amrita. This is the essence of Upadesh Amrita, the nectar of instructions of Rupa Goswami. Well, he also says, Vacho Begam, Manasa Kroda Begam, Jibha Begam, Udurabhasta Begam, Etan Begam, Yoga Sahita Begam. Sarvam Apimam, Pritibim Sasishat. What does this have to do? After describing the Madhya Lila, these things I said, deference to Vrindavan Das Thakur, introducing Rupa and Sanatan with a couple of verses, showing the division of the Leela, 24 years in Navadvip, 24 in Puri, 6 of them traveling, 6 in Puri and 6 traveling, Madhya Leela, other 12, Anti Leela. Then he begins the synopsis, a verse, after verse of the Madhya Leela. That's the first chapter. Then the second Leela, he goes, synopsis of the Anti Leela. And at the end of that, he says, and people, and I've written this book, and there's a lot of Sanskrit verses in it, and some people say it's hard to understand, but I can't please everybody. He said. Actually, he says, Srimad Bhagavatam is full of Sanskrit verses, nobody complains. So don't complain. Take advantage of this. Use your time. Try to understand Chaitanya Charitamrita. What is this book? I remember one of the first persons in the Western world to ever read Chaitanya Charitamrita, probably the first person to ever, like the first person to ever sell a Bhagavatam in North America, Europe. Well, first person to sell Chaitanya Charitamrita. Because while these books were coming out in a flurry, probably wanted them out in a hurry, because he was way ahead in his translation work from the publishing department. Well, we were walking on the beach with Prabhupada, I was there, and Ramaswara Prabhu was telling him, he was in charge of the BBT, was telling him how they had a plan. They'd come up with a plan. They stayed up all night to come up with a plan. Within 18 months, 2 books a month. I think it was, maybe it's 9 volumes or something. I forget what it was. Anyway, 2 books a month. And 2 books a month to 9 books. In 9 months, they would have 18 volumes. I think there's 18 volumes, the way they had thought to lay it out. So in 9 months, we'll catch up. 2 books every month. And Prabhupada said, 2 books every month. I want all books in 2 months. And I'm telling you, Ramaswara went into pralay. Impossible, he said. And Prabhupada, quoting Napoleon, said, impossible. The word in the Fool's Dictionary, and walked on. That was it. So they did it. 2 months, they did all books. That was the marathon of marathons. But as the books were being published, first thing they had was half a dozen or a dozen or so that they had gold embossed on the edge of the book, around the pages. That's an extra feature. So they printed a few of those, and the Prabhupada said, and my friend Ramaswara was sending me those. And there I was in Chicago at the time, actually, and reading, after selling books all day, at night, reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita with the devotees, with a little hot milk. I had a little room they gave, and there was no windows. I stayed in, separate from others who were spread out on the floor, and I would let them all come in the room and read from Chaitanya Charitamrita. And then the cases were sent, and then we went out, started selling Adi Leela. This book to people, I thought, I don't understand this, but what Prabhupada wants, and we're doing it. And we're reading on the way out in the van and on the way back. And I was reading this, and I thought, this is what I thought. I thought, all the books are in this book. He's quoting Ujjwal Nilmani, he's quoting Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srimad Bhagavatam, Padma Purana, Bhagavad Gita. This is my first immediate thought. What an extraordinary work is Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so Prabhupada engaged us in distributing them along with his other books, of course. And this was part of the means, as I say, the way, a form of Sankirtan, the Brihat Mridanga, to engage in the breadth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, the dispensation that was so much characterized by Nityananda Prabhu. That will not leave you separate from the depth. No. If you think, oh, they're only out there doing Vaidhi Bhakti something. We are sitting at Radhakund doing Rag Bhakti. That is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is really about, the internal reason. Don't ignore the external reason in the name of the internal reason. Indeed, part of the external is Rag Bhakti itself, according to Chaitanya Charitamrita. To give Rag Bhakti to the world. Now, how will you give Rag Bhakti to the world? Will you make an announcement on television? Everyone should move to Radhakund. Sit down there and do bhajan. Is that how you will give Rag Bhakti to the world? You got to use a little intelligence how to give Rag Bhakti to the world. You got to understand it and figure out how to talk about it to common people, and that should be pretty consuming. And you need to be consumed. When you're consumed in that way, then vacho vegam, manasa krodha vegam, jibha vegam, udorapasta vegam, etan vegam, yo visaheta dhira, sarvam apimam kitibim sasishat. That means when all the Vegas urges are controlled, the urge to speak, the urge to taste, right? Vacho vegam, the urge of the mind and anger, controlled. Vacho vegam, manasa vegam, jiva vegam, the urge to taste. Udorapasta vegam, the urges of the belly when you're hungry, the urges of the genitals. When all these are controlled by bhakti, right? Then pritibim sashishat, you become the teacher of the whole world. You want to teach about Raga Bhakti? You have to become a Raga Bhakta. And it begins, that's said in Upadeshamrita. This is the essence of all the teaching, but you have to follow the other verses that lead to that. So how will you bring your senses and all these urges under control? This is how Madhya Lila begins then. After summarizing the Madhya Lila in chapter 1, after summarizing the Ananta Lila in chapter 2, he begins the narrative that will go for 20 some chapters. Adi Lila is, I think, maybe what is it, 13 chapters or 17 chapters, maybe 17, but 7 of them are all tattva, explaining the Mangalacharana. The Lila narrative doesn't begin until the 13th chapter, perhaps. So it's shorter than the Madhya Lila, as I'm saying. And Anti Lila, shorter. Forget how many chapters, much shorter. Then the main thing, the Madhya Lila, and it begins the Madhya Lila with what? It says, the actual, now he's going to start narrating it, not taking from the synopsis to play out everything that he's given in a synopsis prior. And he wrote it, and that, why did he give a synopsis? Because he says, I'm old. My hand is shaking. I'm practically blind when I'm writing this. If I can get through this synopsis, then I will also play it out in greater detail. This is his final work. He says, in his own Sanskrit verses, after accepting the sannyas order of life, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, out of intense love for Krishna, he wanted to go to Vrindavan, but apparently by mistake he wandered to Radhadesh, and there later arrived at, and there from there he went to Shantipur somehow, and enjoyed himself there with his devotees. And so I offer my respects to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Vita Chandra Jai Go Bhaktivinoda Chavishavat Sa Sheshe Nagamas Ta Shukla Pakhe Prabhu Kolila Sannyas. He says, at the end of his 24th year, in the month of Magha, Sri Chaitanya accepted sannyas. During the waxing moon of the month of Magha, sannyasa kari prema veshe cholila Vrindavan Radha deshe teen din kolila Brahmana. After accepting sannyas order, Mahaprabhu, out of intense love for Krishna, started for Vrindavan and mistakenly wandered about in trance in Radhadesh for 3 days. Eshlok Padi. Prabhu bhavera aveshe brahmite povitra koila shab radha deshe. Passing through the tract of land known as Radha Desh. It's not Radha. It doesn't have anything to do with Radha. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recited the following verse in ecstasy. Etam sastaya paratmanishtam ajasitam puvatmahar mahadvi aham tarishyami durantaparam tamo mukundangvi nishevaiva. This is a verse from Bhagavatam, 11th canto. And it's all about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's sannyas. So the point I'm making here is the sannyas and the preaching that he does as a paribrajak is not something to be dismissed as external, we're not interested in. It's about controlling the senses, right? Vachu vegam, manasukho vegam, all these things. It is said, well, so it's through this is a verse Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanted. It's all about sannyas and about the nature of his sannyas, acceptance of the sannyas, the role it plays in attaining his ideal. It's not teaching us that everybody should become formally a sannyasi. Therefore, just before we explain the verse, we hear Prabhu kahe sadhu e bhikshura bhachana mukunda sevana vrata koila nirdharana paratmanishta matpravesh dharana mukunda seva hoy sangsar dharana. He says, Mahaprabhu approved the Prabhu kahe sadhu. This is very much, very good. Sadhu, sadhu. Very good, very good. This verse is very, he approved this verse. He embraced this verse from Bhagavatam. E bhikshur bachan. They are the bachan, the words of the bhiksha, the beggar. In the 11th canto, the Avanti Brahmana. 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Mukunda Seva Brata Koila Nidharana. What is the essence of this verse? What's indicated in this verse is that Brahman took sannyas. What did he do? What did it mean? We see sannyas is an anga of Gyanmarg, because vairagya and the culture, the overt culture of vairagya is an anga of Gyan. But I said earlier, vairagya and Gyan are not angas of bhakti. Rupa Goswami teaches us in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. They are byproducts of bhakti. What does Bhagavatam say? Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Jnanayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayarahoitukam. By Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita. By bhakti to Vasudeva. Bhakti Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Jnanam Vairagyam Ashu. Very quickly, Gyan and Vairagya will come in one who does bhakti. They are maidservants of bhakti. They are the two tributaries that need, as I said earlier, enter into bhakti to reach the Bay of Bengal, the goal of all rivers, to come from the mountain to enter the ocean, right? Unobstructed. So they follow bhakti. They are not the way, they are a byproduct of bhakti. But in Gyanmarg, they are the way. So what is this acceptance of sannyas on the part of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's personally teaching bhakti and Braj bhakti? What does sannyas have to do with Braj bhakti? What Mahaprabhu says here. This verse is quoted by Krishnadas Kaviraj. It's a Sanskrit verse from Bhagavatam. We'll give the translation, but the essence of the meaning here is explaining in these two Bengali verses. He says that Prabhupada, he said, Sadhu, that the words of the Brahman, this is what he's saying, the words of the Brahman, the Avanti Brahman, in 11th skanda of Bhagavatam, he says, Mukunda Seva Brata. Mukunda Sevana Brata. That Seva, embracing, taking a vow of service to Mukunda, that is the essence of the kind of sannyas that Mahaprabhu has taken. What does the sannyas of the Gyanis have to do with that? Nothing. Nothing. They're giving it up. And if they're Mayavadis, they're even giving up, for the most part, the service of Bhagavan altogether. This is a different idea of sannyas than you find in Jnanamarg that's been advocated by Shankar and so forth. How many sannyasis were there in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission in the beginning? 9. Keshava Puri, Keshava Bharati, Paramananda Puri, Brahmananda Bharati, so on and so forth. Ishwar Puri. They became the roots of the metaphorical tree of bhakti, right? Grounded in renunciation, but something coming out of that renunciation that's more than that. Growth coming out of that, right? Post-liberated status. Yes, by Ragya Vidya Nija Bhakti Jogam Shikshatameka Purusha Param Sri Krishna Chaitanya. This is Sarvabhauma, when he's converted, he says, these verse about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He came to give that bhakti yoga that Vairagya is impacted inside of automatically. If you're going to serve the senses of Mukunda, Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam, Bhakti Rutam. This is bhakti. Sarvo Padi Banir Muktam, Tat Parat Nirmalam. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam, Bhakti Rutam. What is bhakti? Sarvopari, give up all these designations. Naham vipro nacha narapatir napi vaisho nasudro. Naham bani nacha grihapatino nasto itiva. Kintu pro de nikila. Paramananda punamritabde gopi bhatu parakamarayo. Das samudas. All these. I'm not a Brahmin. I'm not a Sudra. I'm not a Vaishya. I'm not a sannyasi. I'm not any of these things. These are all external. I'm the servant of the servant of the servant of that one who is the lover of the gopis. Gopi Jana Balaba. Saha, Gopi Jana Balabaya. Saha. I give myself to him, to Mukunda. Mukunda. Here the word is used. Mukunda, this name. Muku-da. Da, to give. Something special, beyond mukti, it means. Who gives something beyond mukti. Mukunda. That is bhakti. Bhakti can give mukti, but mukti cannot give bhakti. Bhakti can give gyan. Gyan doesn't give bhakti. They are inside of bhakti. And way inside of bhakti, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is coming, in the depths of the Braj Leela. He's saying the essence of the sannyas in the Bhagavatam. So there is sannyas taught in the Bhagavatam. And Chaitanya Charitamrita is underscoring that to help us understand Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's sannyas and distinguish it from the sannyas that we say, this has nothing to do with Chaitanya Vaishnavism. It's an anga of Gyan. What is the difference here? The distinction here is the essence of what the Avanti Brahmins said, the verse that he quoted, the famous verse cited here, Etam sastaya paratmanishtam adhyasitam purvat and so on, is Mukunda Seva. Paratmanishta. Etam sastaya paratmanishtam. Para-atma-nishtam. Nishta in the para-atma, in Bhagwan. How will you put nishta in the param-atma if it doesn't really exist anyway? And neither does your atma. That's Mayavad. You understand? How can you put nishta, confidence and full faith in something that's only provisional as his thought? Something to focus your mind on. so that your mind can stop altogether. No. Paratmanishta, and it's further described. Mukunda Seva. Samo Mukundamri Seva. Full saber to Mukunda, the Paramatma, have nishta in this. This is what the sannyas of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is about. And what does he say? He says, Prabhu Kahe Sadhu, a Bhikshu Bhakshan, the Bhikshura, of the Bhiksha, of the beggar, his words, Mukunda Sevana Brata, Koila Nidharam. That is the meaning. And then he says what? Parat Munishta Matra Vesh Dharan, Mukunda Seva Hoy Sangsar Tarna. He says, it is about, further he says, it's about Paramatmanishta, faith in God, giving yourself entirely to his senses, with your senses, with all of your senses, serving his senses. This is how to bring about Vacho, Vegam, Manasapota Vegam. And as this comes about, then gradually, as Upadesharamrita teaches, taste will come. You will accept the things that are favorable for bhakti, right? You'll avoid the things that get in the way of bhakti. Say, Darati Patakrinati, Bhunte, Bojayate, Chaiva, Sadvidin. This is Upadesharamrita, right? All these, what giving gifts, accepting them, so avoiding them. He goes through it gradually, right? He's teaching Sharanagati and Anukul, Pratikul, gradually, taste will come, then you end up sitting on the bank of the Radhakund, right? Sitting in the Gambhira, small room, no windows. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they put him in there to protect him from himself and his madness. Still he came out. He melted and came underneath the door. Ended up on the beach, thought it was the Jamun in the dark of night, jumped in, caught him in the fisherman's net, and the devotees went looking for him everywhere, and so on and so forth. Fell in the cowshed, right? His limbs contracted like a tortoise, as the Gita says. You have to contract your limbs like a tortoise, and only reach out with them, this is bhakti, for the service of Krishna's senses. Contact the sense objects only for the service of Krishna's senses. Rishikena Rishikeshan Sevanam. Bhakti Uchate, Narad tells. This is bhakti, right? My senses for the service of Krishna's sense. Give up all the other designations. I'm servant of Krishna. That's who I am. I'm Mukunda. I'm a Sevite of Mukunda. He says, Paratmanishta Matra, only for Paratmanishta. That's what he accepted these austerities for. He accepted the austerities of the sannyas order only for the purpose of having as few impediments as possible, distractions as possible, for serving the senses of Krishna. This is Mahaprabhu's saying. Of course, he's teaching also others, and for that reason. But this he says here, and Vesh Dharan Mukunda Seva, Hoy Sangsar Taran. So you can cross over samsara by this Mukunda Seva. And he says here, he's basically saying here, it's not about Vesh Dharana. It's not about changing your dress only. The change of the dress is only as useful as Mukunda Seva and Paratmanishta is what you're all about. If you're changing the dress just to attract people with some guru bhav, like our little cat who likes to sit on my seat. Gotta get over that in this life. That's what you're here for. Right? Okay, she just agreed. No, we don't want a guru bhav. Another name for guru bhav is Purusha bhav. The enjoying bhav. Oh, we have to look and see. So much talk about bhav. Look and see. Is there any Purusha bhav there? As much as Purusha bhav is there, there'll be no other kind of bhav. No, that has to be given up. Purusha bhav. You have to be transcendent to the gender distinctions. Still, we refer to you as he or her because you're to be a gopa or a gopi. That's little comment. But I don't mean to dismiss the social sensibilities of some in this regard. But this, the point is what Mahaprabhu Sannyasa is about. And this was something that was emphasized by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who would give, along with the sannyas mantra, this verse, as Prabhupada did to us, all the sannyasis to chant, for strength. This verse of the Bhagavatam. It's chanted by the Avanti Brahmin in the time when people were criticizing him, they were abusing him, and so on and so forth. And he expresses his resolve, despite all of this, for the service of Mukunda. And yeah, we've taken some criticism. We're taking sannyas. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was criticized by others for not sitting at Radhakund, for taking sannyas. But they're happy to take those who Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and the Bhaktivinoda Parivar awakened faith in bhakti. They're happy to take those who have been confused by their propaganda into their midst and accept them as their best disciples. Whoever leaves Bhaktivinoda Parivar by propaganda still echoes of this around. It was criticism of Bhaktisiddhanta, who critiqued his own tradition. He took the sannyas vesh. Nobody was doing that. The custom was to take white dress but he took the sannyas dressed like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, stick out like a thumb, short thumb in public, and he wanted to imitate the Christian missionaries who were coming. He said, we'll send our own missionaries out. He called them Jivanta Mridanga, living drums. And they would speak from the text and the publication, be involved in the publication of them. Not a typical characteristic activity of a Mayavadi sannyasi, be publishing books, but they would do this and sell them in the marketplace and so forth. At the train station, Nadia Prakash, Nadia Prakash, Nadia Prakash. He had his brahmacharis out there. If they would sell one magazine at the Howrah station in Calcutta, he would be very pleased with them. It was a daily magazine that he was publishing daily. This was his approach to Rag Bhakti. Like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, going everywhere, sharing bhakti, teaching it, exemplifying it, figuring out how to talk about it in such a way that you can bring people within it. This is a Bhaktivinoda Parivar. Mahaprabhu said, my name will be heard right in every town and village. That they started to think in Gaudiya Vaishnava. It's just, can't take that literally. Well, Bhaktivinoda took it literally. And Bhaktisiddhanta gave it shape. And Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Maharaj, took it all around the world. And Bhakti Raksha Srila Maharaj, I like to say, told us to stop for a minute now and think about what just happened. After Prabhupada, what just happened? And how to proceed from here, doing the same thing, understanding it in greater depth and what it is, and so on and so forth. Of course, Prabhupada was very careful to, when that was first reported to him, this Tripurari Das has sold, this many books was written to him. Prabhupada wrote back, very nice that he sold so many books, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't remember the rest of what he said, except afterwards at the end, he signed his name, and then he put a little asterisk. He said, wrote in his own handwriting, make sure he's also reading them. I was reading them, which I was. At the time I was thought to be the most well-read devotee and the most humble devotee in ISKCON. That was the brahmacharis, they thought that. Kind of them to think in that way. It took some effort, but it was a labor of love. The Prabhupada, to sacrifice, to go. I took sannyas because I thought I want to be that much more committed to whatever I could do, how much more formally I could be committed, what it would take. Ramaswara wanted me to take sannyas because then the devotees would listen to me more, and I was kind of orchestrating, a lot of the book distribution and so forth. So These are the kind of things that we did, and this is following in the footsteps of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And like I say, in the absence of Prabhupada and the Bhaktisiddhanta, some people come out from the woodwork, night crawlers, night crawlers when the sun sets, night crawlers complaining, that wasn't so bright. That moon wasn't so bright. Look at me, beep, beep, I've got a little light over here. Right? I know this many verses. I bet you never read Nirmani. Well, how can you possibly understand Krishna consciousness? How will you get the Manjari Bhav? So some foolish people who didn't have Guru Nishta, oh, I should go over there. I'm gonna get and you don't have a, where's Bhaktisiddhanta's Diksha Patra, his letter that says verifies he was initiated. Of course, my reply is, ask Gorkishore. He didn't read it right, so maybe it's not entirely necessary that you have a Diksha Patra to demonstrate that you were initiated. These are things that were incorporated by the Goswamis, not the Jati Goswamis, to give some shape to the mission, but they're not essentials. They're nice, they're nice ideas and so forth. And they try to connect the formalities, the type of tilak with the ideal from this parivarana, all good things, but not essential, especially for a nirapekha, ayati, so we don't see it. They complain, he's wearing saffron. What is this? The color should be white. Why not complain about Kinkori Baba? He wore burlap. He used to go in a burlap bag. Why don't you complain about him? Right? So these glowworms, if you will, night crawlers, I call them, saying the moon, the son of Swami Prabhupada, he didn't tell you about this, he didn't tell you about that. Bhaktisiddhanta, Bhakti Vinod, we know, we live at Radhakund, we live at this place. I don't want to offend them, but they're many. Yeah. But they should not offend and misunderstand what Prabhupada was doing, what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was doing with his sannyas. We're drawing it right from Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bhagavatam. There is a Vaishnava kind of sannyas, Tridandi sannyas. What do you think? Mahaprabhu took the mantra, Tat Tvamasi. There you go. Now you're all initiated as sannyasis in the Gyan Marg. No, this was the mantra, but he asked Keshava Bharati, is this the meaning of the mantra? You are his. Instead of you are that, which doesn't make any sense. How can you be that? You can be, even grammatically, it's a better rendering of the aphorism of the Upanishads. You are his. And Keshava Bharati lit up with Vaishnavism. Just like Akrura at Akrura God saw Vaikuntha, you heard, Krishna and Balaram showed him Vaikuntha. So there's a Vaishnava sannyas. Mahaprabhu himself was a sannyas. There's a place that the great stalwart preacher seeks to establish such a formal order. You can complain on the basis of the wrong color. You can go back to Godhead with that color. And then those complainers, who are their best disciples? Those who lacked Guru Nishta in Bhakti Vinod Paribar, they become the best disciples of all these people. And they go there and say, Guru Maharaj, would you like to go to the West? Travel and preach? Can we print your books and translate them and circulate them? Where are they getting all that from? It's not even the idea, what to speak of the power, is not coming from the Paribar that they've gone to with their lack of Guru Nishta. Lack of Guru Nishta in the very persons who gave them faith in Bhakti to begin with. This is not a good analysis. They've been deceived themselves, and they become the best disciples because they're coming from our party bar and they're trained and they have some instilled within them this idea of sharing bhakti and so forth. Get busy. Should we build a temple? All coming from bhakti. We appreciate all the party bars, but we don't appreciate any criticism of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, doing the work of Bhakti Vinod, our Guru Maharaj, and our party bar, and what our particular contribution is, and how it precisely follows in the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in terms of his Madhya Leela, traveling South India for 2 years. He went to Bengal and came back on the advice of Sannyas, of Sanatana. Then he went again and actually went to Vrindavan, right? Finally came back again. This all took 6 years. He went to Benares. There he gave a Sanatan Siksha. At Prayag, he gave a Rupa Siksha. Rupa, and Sanatan came to Jagannath Puri also. All these leelas are there in Madhya Leela. But it begins here with this point, this very nice verse. I should read the translation of the verse. I mean, it's really explained in the two Bengali lines that follow it. But the Brahman of Avanti said, I shall cross over the insurmountable ocean of nescience, being firmly fixed in the service of the lotus feet of Krishna. This was approved by the previous acharyas who were fixed in firm devotion to the Lord, Paramatma, personality of God, is Prabhupada's translation. And of course, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when he went to began to establish his order of sannyas for preaching, missionaries, sending them all over the world, living drums, as I said, as he called them, Jivanta Mridanga. He researched the Ramanuja Sampradaya, where they have sannyas, the Madhva Sampradaya, where they have sannyas. There are forms of Vaishnava sannyas. So, and he concluded this is called Tridandi sannyas. Instead of Ekdanda sannyas, Tridanda. So the danda has three: body, mind, words, and the Jiva danda is a little one. It's bowing down. He fashioned it like this, following the examples primarily, I think, in the Ramanuja Sampradaya. So this is beginning of Madhya Leela. The sannyas of Chaitanya, the wide-scale preaching, Nam Sankirtan, all the lessons to be learned from his teachings to Sarvabhauma, to Rupa Sanatan, his conversation with Ramananda, where he becomes a student and Ramananda is giving the answers. Of course, Mahaprabhu is saying, say more. Yes, that I approve. And then to the point where we cannot say anymore. Yeah. So again, we find in the context of the breadth, spreading that he was doing, there's depth also, and depth to be had by that. This will, consuming yourself like this, creating a mission, doing something for Mahaprabhu in the world, following the predecessor, the charges. This will bring Anti Leela in the heart, open the doors to enter the Navadvip. And attain the kind of things that I said earlier, Vrindavan Das Thakur was praying. This is my ideal. This is my ideal. Krishna's Kaviraj, Swami Maharaj ki jai, Chaitanya Charitamrita ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Gaur Premananda. So we stop there. What's the time?
12:30.
12:30. Okay. Sample mantra.
Shri Guru Maharaj ki jai.
Please, well, if you come back tomorrow, we'll talk again. Gopal Bhatta's appearance.
I will see if I can say something about it.
I understand. Very
Go
well.
after.
Yeah.
Driving until 4:30.
Okay, that's time. No problem. Okay.